The following is a summary of the Sicha of Shabbos Parshas Lech Lecha Tov Shin Nun Beis. Parshas Lech Lecha is a key and general parsha, because in this parsha there starts the whole time frame and beginning of Avodah of Avram Avinu, and the first command to Avram Avinu, and further the promise to Avram Avinu that his children would inherit the land. There was the covenant of the Bris Bein Abasarim, and it finishes with the mitzvah of Bris Milah. And since Avram Avinu was the very first Yid, and the very first commandments to him were the promise of Eretz Yisrael and the mitzvah of Bris Milah, it's understood that these are representative of the general content of Torah and Yiddishkeit. With Avram Avinu, there started the 2,000 years of Torah. As Chazal say, the first 2,000 years were chaotic. However, when Avram Avinu came, there started the 2,000 years of Torah, which means that Avram and his avodah was a hachana, a preparation for Matan Torah, especially where the tzivui of Lech Lecha leads into Matan Torah. And from that perspective, we understand that all the details about Avraham Avinu before Lech Lecha are not recorded. Only those details after he was 75 years old and received the tzivui are recorded, because those are key in the preparation to Matan Torah. Since everything that is written in the Torah is an eternal lesson for us, we need to understand what is the lesson now that we can take from the command of Lech Lecha. My dehava, hava. What happened in the past happened. Avram had this command Lech Lecha, and he went to Eretz Yisrael. That was a one-off story. What lesson does it have to us? And every year we read it again, and we read it also b'tzibur, and we relive all the matters of the parsha, and with additional vitality, and therefore it's understood that every single year there should be more and more preparation for Matan Torah over the years that have previously gone past. So that even brings into sharper focus the question, what lesson is Lech Lecha to us now after we've already received the Torah? Furthermore, it says, B'chol yom yu be'enecha kachadoshim, we should see Torah as something new every single day, and Ma'alin b'kodesh, we should go up in matters of holiness. After the so many years of receiving the Torah and delving into the Torah, what possible addition and instruction is Lech Lecha to our preparation of Matan Torah? The answer is, He hanoisenes. Since every single day a person's perspective on Torah should be that it's a new Torah, and Ma'alim b'kodesh, we're always ever increasing our level in Kodesh, therefore there needs to be a Lech Lecha every single day, a halicha amitis, a true movement as a preparation for this Matan Torah of this year and this moment. This is emphasized in the Chazal that tells us that by Matan Torah itself, after the first dibur, after the first commandment, parcha nishmasan, their souls left them. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to bring a special tal, a dew, lahachiyos mesim, in order to revive them. So from the very fact that their souls left them, we can understand that after the first commandment, they had already reached the zenith of avodah, which is why their souls left their bodies. Nevertheless, the tal was brought because, however much they had achieved at that point, there was still even more to achieve, which is the idea of halicha, going to a much higher level. However, what we need to emphasize over here is that the Lech Lecha is not just moving from one level to an even higher level. However, the idea of Lech Lecha, in fact, comes to bring a shleimus, a completion and a perfection in Matan Torah itself. And in order to understand that, we need to ask a similar question to what we have asked in relation to the entry of the Bnei Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael. Every year we read of the promise of Hashem to Avram Avinu to enter into, that his children would enter into the land. Now, Lech, Hashem has already given us Eretz Yisrael in the past, and again, what has already happened. And therefore, the command, Lech lecha mi'aretzecha el ha'aretz asher arecha, we're talking about a land that's already been given to us. And especially after so many years of our avodah, especially the avodah of Machda Eretz Yisrael, of making here Eretz Yisrael, we're not holding at the beginning of that, we're holding much further than the beginning. So the answer is the following. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Avram Avinu Eretz Yisrael by the Bris Bein HaBesarim, he gave him 10 lands, not just the 7 lands of the 7 nations, but also the lands of the Keni, Knizi, and Kadmoni. B'Poyol, they only at that time received the lands of the 7 nations in there. However, La'asid Lovoi, in time to come, we will receive another 3 lands. But all were given at that one moment to Avraham Avinu. And therefore, it's understood that in the duration of time, although we receive then only 7 lands, we will receive another 3 lands. And in fact, that as a halachic aspect to it, that La'asid Lavi will also add Orei Miklot in those lands, cities of refuge in those lands. So just as it is in reference to Eretz Yisrael, so too it is in reference to Am Yisrael. After the kibush of the conquering of the land, there was the situation of Kol Yoshveha Aleha. All the inhabitants were living in the land. However, the shleimus, the completion of that, will be only la'asid lavoi, when we'll have not only the kol yoshveha, we'll have including also the 10 lost tribes that will come back, and all Yidden la'asid lavoi will come back to live in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore the tzivui, the command of Lech Lecha, also has reference today. Because the entire time that we have not expanded fully Eretz Yisrael to receive the 3 lands of the Keni, Knizi, and Kadmoni, and we have not yet reached the situation of Kol Yoshveha Oleha, of all its inhabitants dwelling in the land, that means that we're still in the middle of the acquisition of the land. And therefore, there still needs to be a Lech Lecha to acquire all the 10 lands. This is of very great importance to our generation, in which Kolu Kol HaKitzin, all the end times for the coming of Mashiach have already passed. Yidden have already done Teshuvah, and we've already polished the buttons, as the Frierdiker Rebbe said. And according to all signs, this is the last generation of Galus and the first generation of Geula. And therefore it's understood that now is the most appropriate time that we need to make preparation for the complete Eretz Yisrael, with all the three lands of the Keni, Knizi, and Kadmoni. The chidush, the novelty being that we will receive these three lands, B'darke Noyem u'B'darke Sholem, in a peaceful and pleasant way, because when Mashiach comes, as the Rambam says, Lo yiyeh milchama, there will not be any wars, and on the contrary, the nations of the world will give us those lands out of their own free volition. And similarly it is in reference to Torah. Since the shlemus, the complete Torah, will only be received la'osid lava in time to come, as it says, Torah chadosha mi'iti teitze, that a new Torah will go forth from me, and the Torah nowadays is, as Chazal describe it, hevel, it's just a mere breath compared to the Torah of Mashiach. Therefore, we're still now in the middle of this halicha, of this Lech Lecha. And therefore, the hachana, the preparation of Lech Lecha, is not just from one level to an even higher level, but in fact, Lech Lecha focuses on the complete and the completion of people being in the land, the complete Torah, and the complete Eretz Yisrael. What is the shaychus, the connection of the three lands with Matan Torah, Keni, Knizi, and Kadmoni with Matan Torah? We'll understand that by again focusing on the concept of Lech Lecha being a preparation for Matan Torah. What was the novelty of Matan Torah? It was the Chibur Elyonim v'Tachtonim, the fusion of the upper and the lower realms. The Bitul HaGazera, the annulment of the decree that the upper shouldn't go to the lower and the lower shouldn't descend to the upper. But what happened at Matan Torah is that empowerment was given that there can be a fusion of the two realms, and that a physical item can become a holy object. A dira la'atzmusai, a dwelling place for the essence of Hashem. This all started with the command of Lech Lecha, and especially with the mitzvah of Bris Milah. Even before Lech Lecha, Avram Avinu recognized HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he publicized Hashem in the world with Mesiras Nefesh, as the Rambam notes that Kiven Shenigmal Eson Zeh, as soon as Avram Avinu, who was called an Eson, a very strong one because he was able to go against the tide, when he stood up and called with a great voice to the entire world, he publicized Hashem, and he had a tremendous effect on the world, on his place, on Choron, the Charoin Afshel Mokem, a place which was a disaster zone. He managed to turn it into a place of Artzacha, Meiladza became his. Even Terach, his father, did tshuva. But nevertheless, all that is not recorded in the Torah. What is recorded is only the post-Lech Lecha. And the reason is because before the command of Lech Lecha, Avram Avinu, him and the world were two separate items. His effect was either in the realm of Elyonim, in the spiritual spheres, as he is called Avram, Seichel Anel Mikol Rayon, which is the idea of abstract spirituality, or in the Tachtonim, in the lower realms. It was only after the command of Lech Lecha, which Lech Lecha denotes the exit and going out from any limitation, even spiritual limitations, that Avram Avinu was able to fuse Elyonim, the upper realms, and Tachtonim, the lower realms. El Ha'aretz Asher Areka, he was able to reveal Atzmos in the essence of God, in the Tachtonim, in the lowest of all places. And that's the novelty that Avram Avinu didn't suffice with everything that he had achieved until that point in his first 75 years. But when he heard that Tzivui Lech Lecha, he went on a movement and on a journey which was completely higher and different than anything he had done until that point, leaving completely his previous level, and in both directions. Milamata lamaila, he went from Haran to Eretz Yisrael, and milamaila lamata, he was able to bring down Elikus to the lower worlds. His name was changed from Avram to Avraham, because he became the Av Hamoin Goyim, the father of the multitude of nations, because at that point he had the empowerment to have an effect on the entire world. One is dependent on the other. Because he had a halicha shaloi be'erech, he had a journey which was going out completely from any previous level. Therefore, he was able to effect a birur, a refining, even in the lowest of all places. And at the same time, asher areka agala oischa ba'atzma, he was able to entertain the highest of all revelations, the revelation of Hashem himself. So Davka, because he had such an aliyah, it was possible for him to do the birur, to do the refining in the lowest of all places. And now we understand why Parshas Lech Lecha is the third parsha in the Torah, because Bereshis is a parsha which deals really with the Bria as it was made from above by Hashem, the Elyonim. Noach is the Sedra that deals with the response and the refining of the Tachtoin, of the lower realms, and Lech Lecha is the fusion of the two. And this comes in a revealed way by the mitzvah of Bris Milah. The mitzvah of Bris Milah is the idea of fixing godliness in a physical item. And that, Maaseh Oves Simen Labanim, especially by the mitzvah of Milah. Why Milah? Because Milah has a chidush, it has the novelty that in the physical body of the Jew, there is fixed a mitzvah. Brisi bibesarchem, my covenant is literally in your flesh. Furthermore, one of the reasons of Milah is because the circumcision weakens the material nature of that limb, and that is not just an idea of surmira, of turning away from evil, being careful and extremely careful with that limb, but it's also an element of kedusha, that limb becomes a chefza shel kedusha, it becomes a bris kodesh, and it has the power to elevate the entire world until v'hoisal Hashem amlucha. So according to this, we can understand that the connection of the fusion of the upper and the lower realms is connected with the promise of Eretz Yisrael and the giving of Eretz Yisrael to the Bnei Yisrael. And because in order to make a Dira Lo Yisbarach properly b'tachtonim, that can be only achieved when we have Shleimus HaMitzvahs, a complete mitzvah performance, which was given by Matan Torah, and specifically in reference to Eretz Yisrael. And therefore it's understood that the giving of Eretz Yisrael to Yidden, this empowers Kiyum HaMitzvah's full mitzvah performance after Matan Torah, that we should in a full measure and manner refine the lower physical world. And that's the connection of the halicha of Avram Avinu, the going of Avram Avinu, to the giving of Eretz Yisrael to his children. So now we understand that the command of Lech Lecha as a preparation for Matan Torah needs to be such that it creates a movement to bring Torah to its full completion. And that is certainly in reference to the Geula HaMitis, because the entire time that we are missing this acquisition of Eretz Yisrael, we're missing a shleimus, a completion in the effect of Matan Torah. And through a complete Lech Lecha, we will come to a situation of mitzvahs Retzenecha, which is the level of Mashiach. And therefore, before the Geula, it's very important to hear and digest and implement the true movement of the Lech Lecha. That's true also in Pnimius Inyanim. It's explained in Chassidus that the conquering of the 7 lands refers to the Midos. The 3 lands of Keni, Knizim, and Kadmoni refer to the Moichin, to the brain. Bisman Hazeh, nowadays, the principal Avodah is Midos, and Moichin are there in order to have an effect on the Midos. La'asid Lave, however, the avodah of moichin in the brain will be an avodah in itself, to connect a yid to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with a yichud nifla, oraisa v'kudsha brichel kol echad, the Torah and Hashem being one. And therefore, it's understood that the complete avodah is davka when you have the 10 lands, b'chol levavcha with all one's midos, b'chol nafshecha with all the eser koiches, and that's achieved b'chol meidecha when you have the Lech Lecha. And therefore, the command of Lech Lecha is that together with the shleimus of Moichin, Elyon, which is the idea of the upper realms, you'll also have a Malach HaOretz Deus Hashem, a world full of the knowledge of Hashem. What is the Hirah B'Poel? What's the lesson and instruction in a concrete manner? Each Yid has an obligation, la'afashala, to be mechadesh in Torah, to bring novel ideas into Torah. And therefore, since Torah is infinite, each Yid has a power to bring new dimensions and ideas in Torah, and one might think that that should only be in a step-by-step process. However, the command of Lech Lecha teaches us that there needs to be a halicha shaloi be'erech, a complete, major and new and great movement and dynamic, revealing hitherto hidden powers within the person, moichin be'etzem, which perhaps nobody even ever thought that this person was even shaykh to such. He could even relate to such deep concepts. And the same, just as it is in Limud HaTorah, so too it should be in raising many students, including gathering communities, teaching them. And whenever one has the capacity to add even one more student, they must do so within all circles of Yidden, especially B'nai Mitzvah, Bar Mitzvah, and Bas Mitzvahs, who every day they become newly commanded in the mitzvahs, and therefore they can be added and further educated. And just as it is in Limud HaTorah and in Talmidim, so too it is in the eichus, in the quality of the learning, that a person should be able to reveal within themselves koiches, powers which they themselves didn't know they had, and somebody else should be able to discern and see in them that this is so. And certainly in our generation, which is the generation before the Geula, we also need to specifically add on in the learning of Chassidus, which the learning of Chassidus is the learning of Chabad, the learning which will bring to the completion of the 3 lands of Keni, Knizim, and Kadmoni. V'hi rotzen, that through the Lech Lecha b'Pashtus we should receive the Geula, all our 10 koiches, we should receive the new Torah of Mashiach, the whole world should be filled with the knowledge of Hashem, the engagements of the entire world, and all echelons of the world, mineral, vegetable, animal, will know, v'yeda kol po'ol ka'ato pa'altoi, that Hashem is the creator. And from Lech Lecha we go to Vayera Elav Hashem, that Hashem should reveal himself completely. V'hoyu einecho royes, our eyes should see it. Teikef umiyad mamash.